Okay, the final installment here is we're going to talk about Japanese metabolism as it's known. And two people, Kisho Kurokawa, who is shown here, and then Kiyunori Kikutake. These people really kind of invent this idea and promote the concept of Japanese metabolism within architecture. And this starts as something that is supposed to be answering or handling the idea of population growth in Japan. Japan is a country with not a lot of land area. It's a relatively small country, and the cities are pretty condensed. Even still, people are kind of famously living in very, very small spaces in Tokyo, particularly. So, housing and population growth in general and city growth becomes a problem that needs to be solved in urban planning and in architecture. And Kisho Kurokawa is inspired by the scientific advancements of the time and the discovery of the structure of DNA. So you've probably heard the word helix. He calls this Helix City, named after the helix. You've probably heard the word helix in reference to the structure that DNA grows in. It's kind of a twisted spiral that is found in our biology. And so this is meant to be associated with organic growth, with biology, with the way that maybe a plant or a tree would grow or our cells would grow. This is supposed to be how he sees a city growing. So maybe the city in this case was kind of this center point, and he's imagining ways that it could grow and branch off and then create new nodes. You can kind of see that those are new nodes of city density in different ways. And so this is supposed to be almost naturalistic growth. And this, I should say, it's almost no coincidence that this happens in Japan. If you guys think back to the Huntington Library presentation, or the idea of Japanese architecture that we saw before when we were looking at the kind of tatami mat measurement system of homes. In Japan, a lot of the architecture didn't follow symmetrical rules. And because it's based on the addition of these spaces that are designed based on the tatami mat proportion, you have growth naturally occurring in this type of, quote, organic way in Japanese architecture to begin with. So it almost seems natural that this idea would develop here and that it would translate into things at kind of a small scale of interior and then also a large scale of urban planning. So this is a collage. Now it almost looks antiquated to our eyes, but in 1961 this is an architectural representation technique that this is now, by the way, in the MoMA in New York. So well preserved and prized here. His counterpart, Kiyunori Kikutake, whose work I want to show you here, thinks about these same issues. So he's thinking about this kind of mass society that needs housing. And he's thinking for a vision of a future city that can be inhabited by flexible spaces. And so this is really, it's called marine cities, but it's a proposal for floating cities. And these are supposed to be kind of flexible, expandable structures that can change and grow. So as the population grow, you add more of these little floaters into the water, and you can build more on top of it. So this answers housing issues that really is a challenge for Japan at this time, and deals with these kind of fantastical, almost disassociated from the land, urban schemes and urban projects. And the way that the towers are shaped here almost looks like a hairbrush or something, but these little things popping out of this core tower, this is an organization system that is meant to supply kind of circulation, plumbing, electricity, all the things that you might need for the units, and then this system kind of plugs into or gets added to the kind of core tower that exists here. So this can be a way to continually prepare for and expand. Again, never happened. Wasn't even really a proposal for something that was meant to happen, but it was a thought exercise and a kind of conceptual project to think through how you deal with an expanding population in a tight space. And then metabolism is particularly relevant and interesting because it does actually affect the built landscape in the 60s. So metabolism doesn't exist at the urban planning scale, but it does exist at the architecture scale. And Moshe Safdie, who is an Israeli architect, actually completes this project at the Canadian Expo in 1967. That was a housing project called Habitat 67. And so this is a project of apartment units, many apartment units, stacked on top of each other and creating the image of organic growth. And the thought was that this thing could actually grow organically. It hasn't. It is popular to live in. It still has tenants and is almost always occupied, but they've never added on to it. And this brings up one of the kind of central challenges of the concept of organic growth is that architecture is slow, expensive, heavy, and just kind of adding more architecture to a place is very difficult. It's not like a kind of tent or a refugee camp or something that just can continue to pop up overnight and then be taken down overnight. This is building, it's concrete, and it's infrastructure too. So the idea that exists with organic growth is there at this time period, but in reality, it never turns into kind of a movement that catches on and actually ever grows, literally. So it's worth looking at here for what it is. So this building is amazing. It's really, it looks almost simple in the way that it's stacked here. It almost looks like something that grew over time, but Habitat 67 is phenomenally complex. And if you stare at this image for a while, just imagine trying to find the stairs to get up to those top units. Imagine trying to find a way of telling your friends what unit you lived in, even if you had a number. It's not like there's a hallway where you could walk down and you'd have a whole series of units increasing in number and decreasing in number. It is actually a very complex organizational system here. There are a series of cores that exist that connect a couple floors in one place and then a couple floors in another place, but not generally all the way through the structures. So it's very indecipherable for visitors and pleasant for residents. So if you live here, one of the upsides of this space is that all of the individual units use the roof of the unit below it as a balcony or as a terrace. So you can almost see this kind of stacking and setback notion of the way these things are created produces that condition for almost every single unit. And then because the building is so varied and so flexible and kind of has a rake to it, right? It kind of gets fewer units at the top and more at the bottom. There's always a good amount of sunlight in the spaces, and you can almost see here where it gets really dark and there's a bit heavy shadow in this particular time of day. There isn't a unit in that. It's kind of a hole. So the amount of thought that went into this project and analyzing how these spaces would really work best for the users is remarkable, and it's still a quite popular place to live, which I think reflects on the success of this particular space. It's all different scales, so the units are range from 1 bedroom to 3 bedroom. They're not bigger than 3 bedroom, but there are different scales of this and kind of different residents who live in that because of the different scales. One of the last projects here that we want to look at is a Japanese example of metabolism, which is by Kisho Kurokawa, who's the first person we were looking at who made the Helix City. And he creates a structure called the Nakagin Capsule Tower. And I show this structure, so if you look at the organization of this, there's this big steel, that's actually steel. There's a big steel core here, and then these little units that plug into this big steel core. This organization system reminds me, and should remind you now, of Kiyonori Kikutake's organization system for marine cities, where you have these core towers that then have units added onto them. So this becomes kind of a popular way of thinking about organizing in Japan and dealing with places that can grow. So this space is called the Nakagin Capsule Tower, and it's meant to be housing in Japan. It's built in Tokyo in 1970 to 72, and it's meant to actually be a place that people could live. It also sort of looks akin almost to Plug-in City in the archigram drawings from the previous video. It's supposed to be a plug-in structure, but again, as we know, architecture is heavy, it's slow, it's expensive, it takes a lot of resources and cranes to actually move anything. So as it's built, it never changes. After it gets built in this way, no things are added into it. It doesn't grow. You don't have these units moving in and out. It's meant to be changeable and account for growth, but it never happens. So these 140 units that exist, there's 140 units here. Excuse me, these are the only ones that are ever built, for better or worse. And these little units are concrete boxes, essentially, that are built off site and then hoisted in place with a crane here. So there are plug-in units to some degree, but they're not as flexible as the idea of the design is meant to be here. The section of the space shows us a little bit about the organization. So the interior core is circulation and how you get from place to place. And then these little units just plug in on the exterior. The remarkable thing about the Nakagin Capsule Tower is the scale of the unit. And this scale is so unbelievably tight. It really underscores what's happening in Japan and this kind of craze for housing at this time in Tokyo. So the unit is meant to be everything you would ever want. It's almost like the little tiny house movement that's going on now, but it's meant to be everything you would ever want to live, or a space for your space to live in, within what is 2.5 meters by 4 meters by 2.5 meters here. And 2.5 meters is like, I don't know, 9 feet or something, maybe not even. It's very tight. A couple years back, I don't know if any of you were here or remember this, but Christoph actually had his Studio 5 students, this was 2 years ago, I guess. He had his Studio 5 students build this thing, build a model of this that was 1-to-1 scale, like life-size scale, out of cardboard. And it was pretty awesome. They did it in Powell Gallery, and they built this thing in cardboard, and all of these funny little furniture details got built into it too. And they could actually open the door to the bathroom and go in the bathroom. Yes, this crazy thing over here is a bathroom. And they could feel the scale of this unit, which is so incredibly tight. It's like being in a cruise ship or something. Okay, but when we look at this, if we kind of further analyze this, when you look at this, this is meant to be representative of the window that exists here. But this is your bed. Above your bed, you have a couple different pieces of technology built into this almost dashboard-like thing above your bed. There is a desk that folds open. Here's a typewriter because that was the technology at the time. All your storage is against the wall here. Everything's built in. And then your shower and your bathroom, everything is built in here. You can see this kind of circular cutout for where you're allowed to stand. Your toilet is here. Your sink is built into the wall. And your shower is over here. So it's all very, very tight. This is the image of the thing. It's very futuristic. It's kind of amazing in the style. And I love that the original technology is still in the space. So they never changed it. It has the TV, it has the phone, the radio. These are the things that were seen as technologically advanced at the time, and they were including them in this space because this is part of creating a unit for living. And I think this should actually remind you of Objectified in a funny way, or even of the Farnsworth house, because it's really almost an industrial product more than it is architecture. This interior is so highly designed and coordinated and built to specific standards and tolerances that it really reminds me of something that's a product and an object more so than a building or a piece of architecture. But it is architecture. And the space itself doesn't do that well. It was used as a hotel for a little while. At first it was supposed to be residences, and then it was supposed to be a hotel, a short stay hotel. So in Japan you can rent hotels by the hour, not necessarily by the day. So you can imagine if you just needed a place to sleep or you wanted to take a shower, this might suffice. If you actually had a lot of stuff and you were going to live here, you might go nuts trying to live in this tiny little space and shower in that shower every day. So it depends on what it's used for. Essentially, by the 1990s, this was really pretty much abandoned. People didn't use it or live here, and then it was supposed to be torn down in probably around 2010 or something. And there was a whole outcry to save this structure and to put it on the historic places list. And I think it was knocked down. I don't remember. One of you guys might want to look that up. I'm not positive whatever happened to it, but I could easily Google that. But that is to say that this is really just a relic. I mean, it's almost like this unit belongs in a museum, not necessarily as a functional unit in Tokyo, where the real estate that this sits on is incredibly valuable. And that's part of the reason it needed to be knocked down, or was going to be knocked down, because the real estate here is so valuable in downtown Tokyo here. So it didn't ever serve its purpose. So again, metabolism is supposed to be accounting for the idea of growth, and growth, natural growth within architecture, which doesn't ever catch on in reality, but is a fascinating concept to think through.